to Niall for coming on last week. We had a great chat about the GAA. I spoke to a couple of people who listened to it, and the interesting thing for them was the kind of human side of it, how somebody, goes from playing for the club side in front of a couple of hundred people to playing in Croke Park or Ballybuffet, as Niall mentioned. And I guess that was I was trying to picture it, having stood in the centre of Croke Park, just at a concert, never with a ball in my hand. And it was daunting even then, and to have to go up and take 45s in front of all the crowd who were against you, I can't imagine. But he was very kind to give up his time. He especially just finished work, and he was, after getting the kids out of the classroom and straight into a podcast. So thank you very much for that, Niall. Any new listeners today or old listeners who haven't done it already, maybe you could subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just hit the button. It'll just once a week. We won't be bothering you. Actually, twice a week, because we put up a clip now. So we will be bothering you, but it'll be only 2 times, which isn't much. And you don't have to watch them all, but it's very important. It's important for our channel to kind of grow and things like that. Also, another thing that is very important to me and to many people who I know, Fusion Training Centre opened back up again, and we got to do some outdoor training and CrossFit. I was so lucky this week because I missed all the wet days, and I felt so bad for the people out on Thursday, because I was looking at the window and it was lashing down, and people were like still doing their thing, still in there, and good on them. But it's really nice for Martin to get it going again, so I'm really happy about that. But we'll get into it. For this week, I'd like to introduce my guest. She's a cognitive behavioral therapist and owner of Full Circle CBT, and her name is Nicola Culloty. How are you, Nicola?
Hi, Derek. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How about have you been out and about?
Have I been out and about? Yes, well, I'm still job sharing, so I'm still teaching. So I still get to go out every second week and teach. And my daughter actually had an appointment on Monday, and I finished really, really early. And we just said we'd chance pennies, and there wasn't a queue.
Oh.
Yeah. So
Score.
we went to pennies. Score is right. My daughter was delighted.
It's funny. It's just like pennies is like a must be under siege. I have not been into pennies, but it just, everybody's mentioning pennies. It's crazy. Now I know what. Yeah. I understand why. Do you know why I didn't go in, actually, I suppose, was to do, and we will talk about anxiety during this podcast, but I went into town about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I did find it quite strange, and the things are still closed, but there was a kind of an eeriness to it. I hadn't been in there, and I was very uncomfortable. I didn't feel right, and I was kind of in and out. I just had to go to the bank and go down and see my dad, and I was out again. But it was quite strange. So in my mind, I'm thinking, I will go in. I'll have to kind of go in and do a couple of things here and there, but we'll talk about it. And I'm sure, Nicola, you will help me get in there.
Absolutely.
Through this podcast. So let's begin at the beginning. Could you give us a short history of your upbringing, please, Nicola?
So I am from Limerick, grew up in Limerick, just outside a town. So would have gone to a really small country school. My dad was working and mom was at home with us. I've one brother, he's in Canada now with his family. And always wanted to be a teacher since I was 4. My mother would always say that in like February, I would decide what I wanted for Christmas and never change my mind.
Oh.
Yeah, so got a blackboard and that was it. And never, ever thought about anything else. I think all of my CEO choices were teaching in different formats, in different colleges all over Ireland. Would have been very anxious as a child, very nervous, very shy. And I think there would have been a lot of like separation anxiety. I know that now looking back, if there was any bereavement in the family, then I would kind of want my mom to come to school with me for a couple of weeks afterwards. And that was probably the start of my anxiety. Very shy then in secondary school as well. And I suppose we all have those negative experiences sometimes in secondary schools as well. And mine wasn't all rosy in the garden. Then went to Mary I and did teaching and stepped into a permanent job at 20.
Wow. That's young.
Yeah, father was delighted, was going to get that pension, but yeah, so it's and then obviously I've changed now and moved into a different field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because obviously you've touched on it there a bit about separation anxiety and anxiety. So that was obviously something that you weren't well, you could say you didn't know what it was like. So when did you first become aware of it being a mental health kind of I suppose symptom really?
Yeah, and even like when I think about this, I'm not even sure that when I did CBT myself, I was aware that it was anxiety. I think that, so when I started teaching, I loved it and I loved being in the classroom. However, I found it that I was very nervous of, parents or, working with colleagues and wanting to be this perfectionist, which is definitely, a symptom of anxiety at times when we want to be perfect and we can't be that all or nothing thinking, we can't be anything but perfect. So I know that it became very physical for me when I was in my mid-20s. I had experience of real like tight chest and chest pains, and went to my GP, and he did recommend that I go to a CBT therapist. So I went to a CBT therapist, and it really, really helped. And that's probably when I became more aware that it wasn't something that I had to live with forever or, just get over or learn how to deal with. It was actually something that I could change and really take that control over. But I think to answer your question about mental health in particular, I think I was aware of my mental health, but it wasn't until I worked in a support role in a school that I became more aware of mental health in general. Mental health of parents, mental health of children. And that's when I really decided to get into the field of mental health.
It's interesting you talk about perfection, actually, because it's not... the perfection thing is certainly something that I think about, that I probably don't look at it as something that I want to be perfect, but I look at it when it isn't good enough. I'm very hard on myself. And I also have this thing about, and it's not, I guess it is kind of a control thing. In situations where you think, if I'm in control of this situation, everything will be okay. And we're going to talk a bit about routines later on as well. But this is kind of, when you think, if I'm in control of this situation, everything is going to be okay. And the situation is beyond your control. If you've got 4 people in a group and you can't always be the one who decides this is what we're going to do right now at this moment, and then we're going to move on to this thing. And I suppose I could draw some kind of parallels with the perfection thing, of control and perfection being something that they're almost unattainable, and it's like bringing the anxiety upon yourself by reaching for these kind of goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where acceptance comes in a lot of the time, where you have to, like, I get people to physically draw 2 circles, not my idea, this is a technique, where you draw the circle, what's within your control, and then, acknowledging that outside of that, there are things that are outside of my control, the weather, the case numbers on a daily basis. There are so many things that are outside of my control. And I think this year in particular, it's been really hard to accept that there is so much that is outside of our control. But then it's to draw your attention to what is within my control. And there are some things. And when I start making that list, what I wear, what I eat, who I speak to, how I feel on a particular day, they're all within my control. So I do, even though I feel like there's lots of things outside of my control, then I can look at what I can control, and then maybe look at accepting the things rather than fighting against the things that are outside of my control.
Yeah. So there's going to be people who are going to, who will listen to this, who will not know what cognitive behavioral therapy is. I know it's a big question, but could you give us a kind of a synopsis of it, if you would?
It's going to be the full hour now. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Yeah, so CBT looks at the cognitive part, which is thinking, cognitions, and then it looks at behavioral, which are the behaviors. So we look at our thoughts and our behaviors, and we also look at our feelings. So there's a model, and within the model, there are 4 components that we look at. We look at our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, and also look at our physical symptoms. And for me, that part is so important because that's how I presented to my doctor, was through physical symptoms. So we look at the relationship between our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physical symptoms, and we look at changing. We look at changing the thought so that it will have an influence on my behavior, also how I feel, and also then on my physical symptoms as well. So we know that they're all connected. If I wake up in the morning and think, oh my God, I so don't want to go to work today, then that's going to have an impact on how motivated I am for the day, my behaviors, how I feel. Maybe physically, it's going to have an impact on me as well. Whereas if I wake up and have that thought and change it to, you're not feeling it today, Nicola, but you're going to do it and it's going to be fine. That will have an impact then on all the other elements, and they will all change as well. So if somebody has an anxious thought, and a lot of time our anxiety or anxious thoughts are, maybe fortune telling, oh, this is definitely going to happen, and worrying about it. If that anxious thought is there and I can change it to a more realistic one, not always a positive one, but a realistic one based on evidence, that will have an impact on how I feel physically, because those thoughts that I'm having are creating reactions in the brain. They're increasing cortisol levels. They're increasing my heart rate. They're increasing my breathing. And so if I can reduce that anxiety and anxious thought and change it to a helpful one, it has an impact on how I feel.
It's an incredible, I really wanted Nicola to come on because I've talked about CBT on here before and I've discussed my experiences of it, but I couldn't give that kind of summary that Nicola just gave there. But I remember when I first started it, I was I was really at my very lowest, and I had been talking to a psychologist, and it was great. It was great to get things off my chest and be able to talk. But I found great about CBT from the very beginning. It was more constructive for me. It was, you were involved in exercises that were going to bring. You could see what you wanted to do. You could see the goal that we were trying to do together, myself and my therapist. And from the very beginnings of just the little tasks he gave me, like walk through town or cycle through town, whichever the first one was, and then slowly building up, it felt it wasn't I wouldn't say they were easy for me, but when he kind of addressed them as such, saying like, all you need to do is just cycle through town, it's grand. If you get to the start of the town and you can't do it, that's fine, you can turn around. All these kind of things was very reassuring. He was really, really great. But to be able to kind of be part of the building process, where we were starting to write on a whiteboard, when you talk about the circles and things like that, and we were starting to write things down, and I obviously take things in visually a lot more than I would, just as two people talking. I could process that stuff and remember it, and I used to get like little bits of homework, and it was again writing things down. I would remember what we were talking about for the next session, and I did 10 sessions complete, and it was easily the best therapy that I went through, and that's why it was really important for me to have you on, Nicola, to talk about it. How did you when you were kind of drawn to CBT as a career, like, why did you feel it would suit your personality?
I think because there's homework and I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
So maybe I just didn't want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so many different parts, like you said, to CBT. So even when I was finished answering your last question, I thought, oh yeah, psychoeducation is so important. I never said that. That psychoeducation part, where you actually help somebody to understand what is going on in your brain. I think for a lot of us, we grew up thinking and believing that our brains are in charge. So what my brain says must be true because it's the master of my body, So being able to challenge your brain, being able to challenge that thinking process or maybe those unhelpful behaviors is really empowering, isn't it? So I think for me, there was so much research, so much studies, the changes can be seen on MRI scans. I'm a real cynic and I don't really believe unless I can see hard facts. The other thing is it's hard facts you're dealing with in CBT. So for me as a person, I would have had thoughts around, oh, that person's going to come in now and give out because I said this, or, and I would have believed that thought for the entire weekend and gone into the classroom on Monday morning, and it didn't happen. And then I had to say, oh, it didn't happen. But I still believed it the next time, got a call about a meeting or something. So it was changing that. And I could see the difference in me over time doing CBT. But I could also see that, for some people, they need it to be hands-on. They need it to be something that is very collaborative. And it's not me sitting in a room, with my pen and paper and saying, oh, well, this is why you feel like that. Yes, we acknowledge the past in CBT, but it's very much here you are now. You're not an 8-year-old child anymore. Now you're here, you're this age. And this is how you're feeling, maybe because of what happened in the past, but where do you want to get to in the future? What are your goals? And then that part about changing the brain comes into it. So for me as a therapist, I'm looking at that neuroplasticity, which is changing those pathways in the brain. So every time I think something, I behave in a particular way, or I feel an emotion, I create a pathway in the brain, neuron to neuron, they connect. If I never think that way again, then the brain prunes it and gets rid of it. However, if I think this, and remember, if this is an anxious thought and I'm thinking it all the time, then it's strengthened and it is something that's your go-to connection. So what we want to do in CBT is create a new pathway that bypasses this one, this anxious thought or behavior or avoidant behavior or safety strategy that I have because I'm anxious about going in somewhere. So that's the part then that I'm building. And like you said, it might be just go to the shop door. It might be just leave the house for a couple of minutes. But it is actually the Nike ad, just do it. There are so many techniques that are in CBT, and one of them being behavioral activation, and that is just do it. So not look for this motivation from outside, or from inside. It's literally do the gym class, do the walk into town, and then see how proud you are, how motivated you are, and check in on those thoughts and feelings then. So I suppose for me, it was being able to read all the research. It's not effective for everybody. Absolutely not. There are some people who, can't exercise and it's not effective for them. There are some people who can't, drink the healthiest of drinks or, eat the healthiest of foods it's not one size fits all. But what I have found through my own experience, but also through the research and now working with people, it is absolutely incredible. I find when I see that change, when I, do a scale on somebody and I can see that their OCD has gone from, extreme down to mild, and that's massive for me. And I do absolutely love it.
That's brilliant. You mentioned empowerment there. That's another thing that kind of comes with every passing, session that I had. That every time I did do that little thing, I would become taller and the chest to get out a little bit more. And I was going for me, it felt like nothing into building back up into. I hate to use the word normal human being, but you know what I mean? It felt like I was becoming part. Yeah, functioning is the better word for sure. And I was in that kind of, I got to about a point where I was they felt less like tasks and more like, a little bit of a challenge, but in a good way, like something that wasn't going to have me up the night before, like freaking out, feeling like very anxious. And that was very important to me. I'm just going to get an ad in quick here, Nicola. Even though I talked about it before, we are on episode 70 or 69. So I have to keep reading this ad out and keep getting it wrong every time. It's brilliant. Okay. This is going to be the one now, the best one. Yeah. Fusion Training Center, Monkstown Athlone. a place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts, and CrossFit. A great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook. Oh, so close. Find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Center or drop in for a chat. Fusion Training Center, train like a warrior. Like I said, we're back open, taking on more people all the time. So get in contact with Martin there and he'll sort you out. I want to talk a bit about the core principles of CBT, and I think you mentioned them already. But are they all? Because when I think of the four that you ran through, okay, are each one as important to as the other? Do they all work in sync, or do we need to work on? Does a certain person need to work on one more than the other, and that kind of sense?
Yeah, I think again, it's very individual. So somebody presenting to me with anxious thoughts, then we're going straight into the thoughts. Somebody who is avoiding and using safety strategies, then it's the behaviors. But they're all so connected that it's very hard to single, to put them apart. So it's really about looking at it as a model, those four elements. And what we're trying to do is look at the thoughts, look at those feelings, the emotions, behaviors, but we're also trying to reduce those physical sensations, because when I have physical sensations of anxiety or stress, then that is all the time sending, a message to my brain and also to my body. So it's bi-directional, it's both ways, that you're under stress, that there is a bear here that you need to run away from when there really may not be any threat at all. And I suppose that goes back to, when we lived in caves and we needed to go out picking berries in the morning. And if there was a bear there, we needed to know to run away. And we didn't need to stand and think about that. So that's why that part of the brain, that fight or flight part, is still so strong in us. But it's so good at doing its job. It tells us that we're in danger when we're not in danger. So we're also looking at, using cognitive techniques for the thoughts, behavioral techniques, but we're also looking at reducing physical sensations. Because if a thought sends a message to my body saying we're in danger here, then after, all those changes have happened and the brain checks back in and says, yes, actually, Nicola, your breathing is faster, your heart rate is faster. If I can relax my breathing and my heart rate by that stage, the brain says, oh, crisis is over. So it's important that you look at all those elements. So it's not just, there's so many different techniques, so many behavioral ones, so many cognitive ones, and I don't use them all. And there are thousands, but there are some really effective ones. And you mentioned one there that, step by step, that we call that successive approximation. And that is breaking something into really, really small, achievable steps. But by doing that, you're actually telling your brain, I'm safe. I've done this much and I'm safe. And it's almost like exposure.
And it's that idea of physical symptoms, because they're the worst, they were the worst things for me. They're the ones that kept me at home all the time. They're the ones that I didn't want to go anywhere. I felt, okay, you're at home and you've a little bit of tightness in your chest. Imagine what you'd be like if you were, and you're projecting kind of these feelings into situations that you're not even in. And they in your head, then your brain is telling you they're going to be bigger, and you're obviously going to just say, I'm bailing on this. I'm not going to do this thing. And I guess that step-by-step approach is what helps in that situation, because of, you might want to jump from being at home to going to a concert, and that's like a massive thing. It would have been for me. It would have been awful, really. But it's about helping those symptoms through kind of small, for me anyway, through small steps. People might be listening to this, Nicola, and I guess people listen to this because it's a mental health podcast, and people listen to this for they might know me, whatever it might be. But for people who are listening to this because they're interested in CBT, how would they know that they're kind of a good candidate for it?
I think that I don't know if there is like a test you can do beforehand. Sometimes it really is about trying it.
Yeah.
I think that you have to be open to it's not even open to change, because yes, the change occurs. I think you have to want the change. And sometimes that want can be, I'm absolutely sick of this, so I just want to change. There is obviously, and like you said, that homework element where there's a little bit that you can do. If somebody comes to me and it's a 50-minute session and we do a technique and they don't do that again for the week or 2 weeks before I see them again, they definitely don't get detention or get a talking to from me. But we know that it's far more effective when you just do it at home as well, because you're actually building up physically, building up a pathway in the brain. So that, you know, if I'm just doing that once every 2 weeks, it's not really going to build up as much. But I suppose it's effective for people who are anxious. It's effective for people who have low mood. There's lots of, you know, even on the HSE website and the NHS, lots of health departments recommend CBT. It's short term, so it doesn't mean that you're going to be talking to me for years and years and years. Generally, it's very, very short term. That doesn't mean that I don't still see people over time and we have a check-in. Absolutely, because, you know, I'm a support as well. But I think that it's really about looking at what is bothering you the most. And then if you want something that can be very effective I want to say a short amount of time, but that's not to say that it has to be a short amount of time. But it is deemed a more kind of brief intervention, depending on the severity of the condition that somebody presents with.
Yeah, like I said, I can't recommend it enough. There was something kind of interesting to me. Obviously, I follow you on Instagram. How does the approach change then for you when you're dealing with teens and children?
Yeah, so it's great because I still obviously work with teenagers and children as well. It's not just adults. And it obviously it's different, but the core elements remain the same. So, you know, I have given a lot of kind of training to teachers and SNAs through the education centres about CBT skills and how you can use it in your classroom. And this is from a teacher who did not use it at all for, you know, years and years with children. And it was like, you know, get out your grammar copies, let's do our work. We have a certain amount to do. Whereas I'm far more aware now of regulation and how important it is. But for children, obviously, it needs to be, you know, teaching them about the brain from a very young age. We can absolutely mention the amygdala and different parts that are involved in fight or flight, and tell them that thoughts are not true. We can obviously use games and art and more hands-on activities. But it's the message is still the same for children. It's that thoughts aren't facts. And that if I feel like doing nothing and that's impacting on my mood, then do something, because and I just think how amazing would it be if children then, I'm gone into Mother Teresa mode now, how amazing would it be if children from a very young age knew that just because I feel like I've low mood today, I actually need to go on the trampoline. And they took that life skill through adulthood, and also that their thoughts aren't facts. So don't believe everything you think, because it's not true. And I say this during my webinars, that I wish somebody had, you know, talked about CBT with me when I was 8. And by the time we become adults, then those pathways in the brain are a lot more, they're stronger. So for children, you see the change so quickly. We know that their brains are still developing. Same for teenagers. There's a lot of development there through until they're in their mid-20s. So early intervention is so important, and their skills. It doesn't have to be when a child presents with anxiety. These are skills that we can do with them before they even present with anxiety.
Yeah, I love that, like, because we talked to an art therapist and a music therapist, and we spoke about how they help kids an awful lot, and they help them, like, you know, build a kind of a platform for when they are older. And it makes so much sense, and like to get it into schools, to get CBT into schools, because obviously people will be listening to this and they'll think that, like, these skills can be used by everybody. It's not necessarily somebody who's got anxiety or they've low moods, like you say, they can be used for everybody, because we all have bad days where we get stuck in a rut and we think all these, like you mentioned about thoughts, get kind of piling on top of us. We can all use these kind of skills to to help us, and that's the great thing about CBT, and maybe why it helped me so much and why it's helping a lot of people. um there was something else I wanted to talk to you about, because uh you've been restricted to Zoom, obviously, like, everybody. How has it been for you? Like, what have been the kind of the main? Have there been any stumbling blocks, or have you found it, pretty smooth?
Yeah, so I worked in a practice in Limerick actually up until the first lockdown, which seems like 10 years ago now. Worked in a practice in Limerick, so it was the commute into Limerick City, the commute home again afterwards, childcare, and not from a very selfish place at all, but the pandemic, the lockdown has meant that Full Circle CBT started, because last March I was here, and some of my clients remained on, came online with me. And then I started thinking, okay, now you have time. And like that, I had to use some skills. I had to say, okay, you are now at home, schools are closed, you're teaching from home every second week, but what are you going to do for the week off? Because if you are just walking around the house with your thoughts, then you have way too much time to think. So anyway, I decided I would set up Full Circle CBT, and it is an online therapy platform, and actually it won't be anything but an online platform. I have found that working in the practice was lovely, and meeting people face to face was, but it's a relationship. It's, that therapeutic relationship is one of the key factors in how effective therapy is. So that's really important for me. So I haven't found that it has that there has been many stumbling blocks, bar bad reception every now and again, and roaring at my son to get off Fortnite because the reception's going, but not during maybe during a webinar, but not during a client. But it has been absolutely fine, and people who may have been anxious to move online have moved online and been fine with it. But it just takes that little bit of time sometimes, whereas I suppose sometimes it's needs must, isn't it? I wanted to still provide support to people. The only way that I could do that was through Zoom. So it was like, okay, well, you're either going to do it through Zoom, Nicola, or you're not going to do it at all. And that wasn't an option. So
yeah, it's when needs must. I think it's something that's going to stick around anyway, regardless. In a lot of fields, it's funny. Now, this isn't the same thing. I'm not. If anybody's sitting at home thinking he's going to draw parallels between a podcast and a therapist, I'm not, right? All I'm saying is we were having people over at the start. It was great. But then when I realized I was on Zoom, I could chat to you. You're not in town. It's grand if people are in the town, they can come out to me. That's different. But I was chatting to someone in Los Angeles. I was chatting to someone in England. I've been able to kind of adapt. And I think this has become part of the normal now, and I think it'll carry on, and I'll probably carry on doing these as often as I can. And if I can get someone over, that's fine. But it's actually less hassle for me. It's actually less hassle to get, say to you, oh, we come on 11 o'clock and we'll record and we go for it. And I don't know, it just seems like the right thing. And it's great that it's working for you. Like that's the important thing. It's not a hassle for you.
No, and I suppose in July, then I kind of set up my own office here. It was a case of running into the sunroom and bringing everything with me. And then I was able to set up an office, and it became a lot more, oh my God, it's really real now, Nicola.
Yeah.
Like, this is actually you kicked your son out of his playroom and moved him into the sister's playroom as well. It became very real. But I've given webinars, in Donegal and in Wexford, and I wouldn't it. And, when you think about giving, presentations or that, obviously you have to factor in travel costs, and it wouldn't be worth it for, that drive up to Donegal. And then you give a webinar and somebody contacts you afterwards and you start online therapy with them, and you have more reach. And I'm not talking about PR reach or exposure. I'm actually talking about being able to work with people in different countries, in different counties, that I wouldn't have been able to work with. And even going back to the CBT skills for children, some of those webinars that I've given, you know, in different education centres, like when I think back, like I get nervous, but at the time I was like, don't look at the numbers on this webinar, it's absolutely fine. But, you know, people contacting you afterwards and saying, oh, I went into school and I tried this and it really helped with my class. And they might be in Galway or Mayo. And you're like, that is just that, like, I love that. I love that reach. I think it's so important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. There was a thing I wanted, this is probably my own little therapy session now. I'm going to talk to you about something. Routines. Okay. Routines. I took out my homework from the CBT from years and years ago. I took it out there during the week. And I was looking at this particular graph that I had to do, and I had to write out exactly what I did from when I got up to when I went to bed, you know, every half hour or an hour, maybe it was on the half hour. And I noticed that right across the board that it was pretty much just exactly the same right the way across. And I thought to myself, like, geez, that was very boring then. But I realized that that wasn't the case. The case was when I was told by the therapist that within those routines that I had set up for myself, I'd become very, very comfortable. And I knew that if nothing messed it up, I'd be fine. But that's not how life works. So when he told me, what happens if you need to go to, like, it could be something like a funeral or something, you know, just something that has to be done. How is that going to mess it up? And I realized that it's not necessarily a great thing to have those strict routines, because when something does mess it up, you get so much anxiety from it. Now, I'm still quite routine led, and people know that. Like, they kind of laugh and joke about it a bit. When things knock it out, I don't quite get as anxious as I used to, but I still get a little bit put out. Like, I'm sure you've come across this kind of thing when routines. So, good or bad, or somewhere in the middle?
I think I remember reading that our brains are anticipation machines. So our brains are constantly anticipating what's going to happen next. Do I need to protect her or him? You know, what's going to happen? Worst case scenario, let's problem solve here. Let's have it all, you know, figured out. And that the intention of the brain then is to make sure that you're prepared so that we don't get anxious. However, it has the opposite effect. Me thinking about everything that's going to happen means that I get anxious then if it's different. What your therapist, you know, the activity monitoring and the mood monitoring, that is, you know, obviously to see what you're doing, the impact on your mood, and yeah, trying to include newness. And, you know, I started writing this course for CBT for children with ASD. And it's really interesting because working with children, you know, with ASD, we talk a lot about routines and how, you know, we keep things the same. But actually research is there to show that, you know, children with ASD, but also as adults and, you know, teenagers, that it's important for us to have newness and to be able to adapt to it. That is why the last year has been so difficult, because we all had a plan. You know, we had summer holidays, we had communions, we had bouncing castles ordered, we had all of this thing, and then all of a sudden there was this virus, and all our routines, our normality was turned on its head. And that comes down to, you know, how well and how much we can tolerate uncertainty. The only way to tolerate something that makes us anxious is not to avoid it. So if I'm scared of flying, the worst thing I can do is not fly. The best thing I can do is fly. If I'm scared to, you know, go shopping in Pennies because there's going to be a crowd there, the worst thing I can do is stay at home. The best thing I can do is face it, even slowly. So if I love routine and don't like uncertainty, then I need uncertainty. Then I need a lack of routine. Now, routine is really important, obviously, but newness then, like traveling a different way home. You know, not having the exact same breakfast every morning, or, you know, I remember reading that, like, changing your toothpaste anything that we're creatures of habit. So, you know, some people do shopping on the exact same evening, go to a different shop, do it in the morning, do things that are different. I'm not talking about big, massive
Yeah.
changes, you know, but some kind of newness every week or in every day. So maybe, you know, you do the same training every day and it's like, okay, I'm going to change it up. Maybe I get up and exercise every morning at this time, and then I do this every day. And that means when I change it, I'm more able to tolerate change then, because I tolerate it on a daily basis or a weekly basis, and I'm not so into routines. It's the same with children and teenagers as well. To increase that resilience and increase that tolerance of uncertainty, we need to improve, I suppose, their how exposed they are to newness.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense actually, because start again, it's like the step-by-step thing. It's like starting small with something to change, you know, change your breakfast cereal or whatever it might be, and then you can move slowly into these kind of things and make it, you know, different for yourself. And you know, it does make a lot of sense. And it's funny how I can dip back into this CBT, the therapy that I received, and it may have been about 8 years ago now, and I can still dip back into it, remembering kind of things we wrote on the board, you know, remembering those kind of ideas, and how that's why I'm kind of quite passionate about it, because of the change it meant for me, and the change I hope can make for other people that, you know, like who you talk to, and maybe even if it's just one person listening to this that might think that might actually help me in some ways. It's great. You're actually
sorry.
Go for it. No, go for it.
At the start of the pandemic last year, I mean, who was expecting, you know, the level of whatever that happened. And I know that I took out a sheet and did cognitive restructuring, which is changing those thoughts, because like I didn't feel really, really anxious, not Nicola of, you know, 2008 or whatever. But what I did feel was, oh my God, like what, like my thoughts were, what if this happens? What if this happens? I was worried. And I took out my sheet and I did cognitive restructuring, which was, what's your thought? What's the evidence that that is definitely going to happen? And what's the evidence that it isn't? And just by taking out that sheet and doing it, it really helped me. I had that sheet there. Anytime I had that thought of, oh my God, it's a pandemic, you did not prepare for this, I was able to take out that sheet. It doesn't mean, like, we all experience stress and anxiety. It doesn't mean that I have to, you know, that because I'm a therapist, I won't ever have stress in my life or things that happen. It just means that hopefully now I have skills that I've brought with me from doing CBT that I can use. So I think that's kind of important, that, you know, we're all human and we all have this anxiety or worry or stress at some stage, or low mood. And it doesn't mean that, you know, we have to go to CBT even for, you know, 10 sessions or 20 sessions. Sometimes we can just say, okay, I'm actually going to go for a walk, and that's going to help my mood.
How has it been? I don't have kids, right? How has it been? How do you try, and someone who you've talked about, who's had anxiety moments, you have to factor in so much more with, you know, with the job, obviously that's huge, but the kids more importantly. Have you been able to have routines of your own? Because when I think of my routines, there's nobody around me to change them. You know, if you've got kids, you can't really have routines because anything could kind of come up. How have you been able to deal with that, like with just outside, I suppose, of being a therapist?
Yeah, so I still think that, like, I like routine, but I have become better at things being uncertain, you know, even especially in the last year. So there might be something planned and then it has to change. And my children are, unfortunately as well, or maybe fortunately in time, learning that as the weeks go on, that you might have something planned, you might have a birthday party, you might have something, you know, a small outdoor gathering, and you may not be able to do that because something might happen. So I suppose I become better at dealing with uncertainty, having some bit of a routine. But yeah, I just think that, like, I do have plans for the week and plans for, you know, what I want to do at the weekend, or but things are, you know, there's a lot of other factors as well. So obviously it's like, what are the kids doing, and you know, what will we do, and the weather. And but I do think that routine is important, but newness and being able to just wake up in the morning and saying, do you know what, we're not going to do that, we're going to do something different instead, is actually a really good skill to give children as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. And so you're starting a 4-week course on next week.
Tuesday. Yeah.
What's that? What does that course entail? Obviously, we've talked quite a bit about CBT, but what have you kind of structured it? That's not a word, is it?
It is.
Structured it as.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I understood it, so it's fine.
Okay, it's English, so that's fine.
Yeah, so this 4-week course, I've run it once or twice before through the education centres, as I said, and now I'm running it myself. So CBT is really recommended also for self-help. You know, the NHS, HSE all recommend CBT skills as a form of self-help as well. So I'm very mindful of the fact that if people have low mood and anxiety, then you need to speak to your GP, you need to speak to a therapist, mental health professional, and receive support. However, there are skills and things that we can do ourselves that will help. So maybe that's just, you know, drawing attention to thoughts. So week 1 of the course is based on cognitions, these cognitive distortions that we have. So, you know, ways of looking at things that aren't always helpful and that are actually negative, you know. So I might look at something and say, oh my God, mind reading, this person thinks this about me now, but I've no evidence for it. So different techniques for changing those cognitive distortions and how CBT works. Then I look at behavioral techniques. So, you know, those behavioral techniques being, you know, opposite action, doing things that you don't feel like doing, but actually have an impact on you. You know, a little bit around exposing ourselves to fear and to things that make us worried and how we do that. Then I do a week as well on the mind-body link, which is absolutely massive. All the research is there to show that my mind has an impact on my body, but my body also has an impact on my mind. So linking the two, relaxation and somatic skills training, which is basically being able to calm the body and calm the mind, and then problem solving as well, because life is full of problems. Maybe not full of them, that's very negative of me. Life certainly presents problems to us. And at times, you know, it's good for us to be able to take that helicopter view, to bring ourselves out of the emotional part of our brain, and to look down on the problem that we're facing or that we're in the middle of. And I suppose being able to connect, I'm all about turning off different parts of the brain and turning on the parts that we need. And, you know, so being able to switch on the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain, so that we can do our problem solving.
I love the idea, because that was another important thing, and I didn't actually have it written down, but about the mind and the body link. I was going through some very, very bad panic attacks, and I still get them from time to time, but the way we kind of figured it out, myself and Kevin was the name of my therapist, and we do a lot of breathing techniques. And I always had this thing in when he brought it up, I had this thing in my mind where I was like, oh, I can't do these in a shop. I can't, you know, because I'm just going to be standing there like, and it's not that at all. I mean, I can literally, if I'm in a shop now, just say a bookshop, I could be looking at a book and doing these breathing techniques. Nobody knows I'm doing them. And they calm me down every time. And it's something that I did not think about before, you know, the mind and the body to the mind, that they were connected going in both directions, you know, and that was so important. And I think, again, it's not, to me, it seems it's not just about panic attacks. It's not just about anxiety. You can get, you can relax from just breathing. You know, it's not, it doesn't have to be, because sometimes we think of it in the extreme, I think, with therapy, that it's the very extremes that people go to for, and that's not necessarily the case. It's to kind of make yourself, build yourself up and give yourself techniques to deal with everyday life, you know. And I think that's what's great, and everything that you seem to cover in the course there it's a building. They're all building blocks to kind of something better and something that can help. And I think it's great. For you, as the therapist, are you constantly learning, like with each session? Maybe not each session, but every day that
Absolutely.
goes by.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love that part of
Mm.
it. When I did my master's, I hadn't been in college in 18 years. I really didn't know how to do anything at
Yeah.
all. I think my first assignment was like an excerpt from like Anne and Barry from like the 1980s. It was just, anyway, when I went back to college, I just felt that, oh my God, this is really interesting. And I love learning. My son says I'm obsessed with the brain, but I do absolutely love learning about what happens. And I think that for not almost buy-in from people, because I know that when somebody says to me, oh, breathing techniques are really good, I'm like, yeah, I know they're really good, but why are they really good? I want to know why. And I want to learn about how I can turn on my parasympathetic nervous system for relaxation. I want to know how I can turn off my sympathetic or my fight or flight. I want to be able to tell people. So if I say to somebody, you have, you're panicking and, you need to take some deep breaths, like I will go into detail and say, okay, your out breath needs to be longer than your in breath because that has an impact on this part of the brain. And then people are like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And showing people the research. And, when somebody comes to me for the first time and I take all the information and then I go and plan, and I plan loosely because other things can come up, and it really is about what the client wants. It's not me sitting there saying, okay, I'm a professional now and this is what happens. Absolutely not. And then you're reading and you're seeing different case studies, and somebody comes back to you and they say something else and it adds a different element to it. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I do it really doesn't feel like work, and I know lots of people say that, but it doesn't feel like work at all.
Well, like especially for someone like yourself, who you say that really enjoys learning, that's the whole. Well, you'd like to think that's the whole point. I guess when you go to a therapist to speak to them, you want to believe that they really want to help you. It's that's why they're there. They're not there because they fell into the job because for whatever reason, and now they're like kind of feel stuck in it. You want them to, you want that kind of passion back off them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think that's so important. So here's the question that it's really on the brink of getting rid of this question. But what do you like to do with your spare time, Nicola?
Spare time, yeah, I think I need to practice what I preach, find more spare time, and I am learning because it has been a really, really busy year, and I suppose next year I won't be returning teaching. I will be doing this full time. It is full time at the moment anyway, to be honest. So I've learned that we don't need to fill all the spaces, and that's what we were talking about, the routine. But sometimes, we can think that our routine is very, very full, or that it's the same thing every day.
Yeah.
But sometimes I need to just sit, and I find that really, really hard, because I did the master's in 1 year and it was crazy busy for that year. So I found it really hard afterwards to find time for myself to do things. So yeah, just, watch TV, go for a walk, not meet up with friends, catch up with friends. Just very normal things, but things that I've learned to appreciate a lot more as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people come on, they think, oh, that question, I have to kind of really think that, I have to make myself sound like really, not that they're trying to make it sound interesting, but they have to get the best in them out. But it's not necessarily about that. Like the question is more, and that's why the question is kind of on the edge, because of the fact that people are so busy. And I talk to people who have like full-time job, they have kids, that there's so much to that. I always think, I can like finish this and go and watch a film or read a book. And it's, I have to try to remember that people are more busy than I am. That's basically what it boils down to. I've just knocked the camera there. This is another thing I talked to with therapists about, can you leave work at work? Are you able to go, like you just talked there about going and sitting? Are you able to do that without thinking about work?
Yeah, that's something I really, really found very difficult when I started. When I started, I brought everything with me. So the drive home, when I got home, it was always at the front of my mind. And we all have, I think, maybe, you know, that imposter syndrome at the start as well. And maybe not just at the start, you know, where you're sitting there going, oh my God, I hope like I do this okay, and that, you know, somebody responds to something. And then the more positive experiences I had, the more I started saying, yeah, so it wasn't, you know, the anxiety wasn't there, I suppose, around it. But I think that's something that just takes a little bit of time. It's not that I don't think of clients or they don't come into my head, but it's not I'm able to detach from it. I have to be able to detach from it, Derek. Like you said, you know, mom going, and maybe being the mom part is the part that detaches me, because I do always point at this door. And I said this recently in another podcast, that when I have my space, I can detach from it. So when I walk out of my office, I switch everything off and I lock the door. And that's my signal to my brain, you're leaving it now. So I actually have a ritual. And then I go out and it's like, Mom, I'm hungry. Can I have, you know, toast and whatever? So it's like, okay. But yeah, you will have moments of something will come into your head, and even though we may not be consciously thinking of something, we know that our brains operate on a subconscious level as well, especially with problem solving.
Yeah.
So if I have a problem, or if I have, you know, a new client and I'm trying to think about it, and I can't just do that when I'm sitting here in the office.
Yeah.
So my brain takes that, and even on a subconscious level, it's working on that. So yes, there have been moments where you're driving going, oh, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And even by having that moment, I know that subconsciously my brain has been trying to figure something out or explore something. So I am much better at leaving it in the office here. I think it's important to have routines and rituals around it for any work that you know, turn a key, or even say, okay, I'm done now for the day. So that you have something that tells your brain, okay, we're done, we're leaving that here, and it goes into a compartment. Because I think that you need to recover, you need to be able to leave things where they are. And I think that's where I wouldn't have been good at that at teaching years and years ago, and that was what caused my anxiety levels.
Very good advice for everyone, really, you know, about leaving things here, whether it's work or whatever it is, and going to, you know, you're away from it now. Imposter syndrome is I feel that every time I do a podcast, I feel it. Do you know, I actually feel it before that. I feel it every time I text someone randomly or out of the blue. Do you want to come on the podcast? There's a bit of imposter syndrome there. But Nicola, it's been brilliant chatting to you. I really appreciate you coming on your Saturday, and I'm so glad I got a cognitive behavioral therapist on, and I managed to say those 3 words together without messing them up.
Thank you, Derek. Pleasure.
Stick with me for just 1 minute. I'll just close this out. I just want to get a quick photograph. I'll need to sort out the lighting. The last time I put up my photograph last week with Niall, and he was grand, and I was just looked like I was in the darkest room, and just you could see the shine of my glasses. That was about it. So we'll figure something out. But thank you, as always, to my mom, my dad, my granddad, Ger and Calvin. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Like I said before, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the Wheatley. We're on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. As always, to everybody who's here all the time, to the new people, thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate it. And once again, to my guest, Nicola, thank you very much.
Thank you, Derek.
Take care, everyone, and we'll chat to you next week. Bye.